Good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? So, we're both on the cybersecurity team, so we try to start out with as much good news as possible. So we're going to start out by telling you we're at war. I'm not exaggerating. It's not the exact type of war that was declared and has been traditionally fought over the centuries, but effectively we're at war. Much like the Cold War was different than the prior wars that preceded it, we are currently at war. When we connected to the internet, we got instant access anywhere to everyone, right? Anyone that wanted to connect up, they connect up. We're all connected in real time, relatively, bandwidth aside. There's bad people out there. There's criminals. There's espionage, intelligence, surveillance agencies, whatever you want to call them, information agencies in some countries. There are good people and bad people on the internet. And we're starting to realize that what we're experiencing is that the free trial period for the internet is over. The value is still there, but the price is becoming apparent now. We're starting to feel not only the value, but the price. So, in that spirit, Sun Tzu has some extremely good advice, because the good news, the bad news is obviously we're at war. The good news is that war is not new. There are centuries and centuries and even millennia of military doctrine on how to conduct yourself in an actively hostile environment, in a wartime environment. Key ones here: if you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of hundreds of battles. We're going to do our best to put you as much as possible in the third category. Cool? So, in this world, there's a mindset that we call assume breach. And this is not assume it's all gone and over and, oh my God, it's the end of the world and it's all burning. This is a mindset that says, it supplements, really, the old mindset of prevent breach. In the prevent breach world, you never let the bad guys in, ever. We have a perimeter, we're safe on the inside, we don't have to worry about it, we're in the castle walls, the outside is bad. In the assume breach world, you assume that they can get in and you protect everything against everything else internally, because it's an actively hostile world, not a warm, safe, comfortable place. Make sense? So, skipped introductions. My name is Mark Simos. I'm an architect on the cybersecurity team. Sean?
I'm Sean Rayborn, and I'm a dedicated cybersecurity architect on the cybersecurity team.
Yep. And we deal with this stuff every day. So we're going to walk you through modern hardening, the lessons we've learned, and the advice that we give on hardening applications and services, which also means hardening operating systems and overall environments as well. And the reason that we started down the road of turning this, working on this body of knowledge, was because we started out with credential theft and pass the hash. How many folks have heard of that? Excellent. Awesome. So we have an updated session on kind of our current guidance based on the current technology and the current learnings. That's going to be a little bit later today, around 5 p.m. Don't ask me what room it's in. I just show up wherever I'm told to. So we'll be covering that specific area, which is the number one thing that the adversaries are using. But the reality is, we've had customers where we mitigated credential theft, and we've always known that the adversaries would fall back. But they're starting to more and more. And so we needed to start coalescing and bring together all of our knowledge on what happens when credential theft, when you mitigate credential theft and they fall back on the next thing. What is the next thing they're going to go after? And that's what we're going to cover today primarily. So, as we mentioned, inside-outside perimeter thinking. The reality is when you look at the new world, these transitions are slow or my clicker is slow? There we go. Maybe? Sean, would you mind a click? The reason why this mentality doesn't work, because it's a really simple one, it's easy, it's a model everybody's comfortable with. The reason this doesn't work is because, one, the adversaries are already in, but two, our data is already out. Whether or not you advocate it or support it or allow it or if you have a policy for or against it, how many people here have experienced their corporate data being stored outside of their network boundaries through various different software as a service capabilities? How many people have not seen it? Okay, well, you need to look harder. So the reality is the perimeter is gone. It's still a useful piece in this world, so you still want to just open everything up to the internet and drop all those defenses, but it's not where your primary focus should be. That's not where your primary investments should be. Mr. Rayburn, did you want to cover this?
So one thing that that we've found in the field is very apparent is how easy it is for people who are amateurs to do professional work. We used to hear the term script kiddie, and it was kind of a derogatory term to those people who were a step above, the researchers, the real professional hackers. Well, now there's these tools that they have a look and feel UI. They have multiple interfaces, and they do a lot of the things that the professional hackers would do using an interface that an everyday above average user could use. If you look at these tools, I mean these are UIs, and we're doing right click, explore, browse files, key scan, screenshot. I mean it's crazy the amount of usability that there is in the tools that are out there.
And literally, if you notice, there is a right-click attack. And that menu, if you do not patch, when the attacker scans your machine, more and more options to exploit your machines will be added to that right-click list in those hacker tools. These are all freely downloadable tools, Metasploit framework, and then that Armitage GUI that goes on top of it, completely free and open and available to anyone that downloads it.
And continuously updated.
Correct.
This thing's not working. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that we've learned from cyber attacks, the first and foremost is that it's a good way to make money. It's a very small investment for the attacker and very large returns. There's nothing out there that does the return on investment in terms of going through and committing espionage. As we know, the adversary is getting better and better, and I personally feel like we're always a quarter step behind or more, and it's frustrating, but it's in order to win the fight, you have to win the battles, and in order to win the battles, you have to defend. And finally, the most important thing to the line of work that I'm in is that almost all, I think pretty much all, are use of legitimate credentials. So, we're looking at accounts that are used, for good purpose, in theory, and the attackers are using them for bad purposes. So.
And essentially, what we see is that this is super common. So if you don't think you're being attacked by this, you are. If someone is attacking you, this is one of the first tools they reach for in their toolbox. This is in everyone's toolbox, the credential theft piece, which is why we have a dedicated session a little bit later today. But it's a silent attack is the problem. We all noticed when we had Melissa, Slammer, I Love You, all those things took down our servers. They showed up in our inboxes. They were something that was in our face. But the reality is this credential theft is not. Well, and it's just as prevalent.
And let's be honest here. Like how many, so we know that you guys are using good practices now, right? How many of you guys used an everyday account that you checked email with, that you went on a browser with as an administrative account in the past?
Let's do it by show of hands. So close your eyes so you cannot see if your neighbor's vulnerable. Come on, close your eyes.
In the past, let's say 10 years ago when you didn't know any better.
Okay, or you know someone that has. Raise your hands if you are.
Yeah, I kind of figured that was going to be the result.
And one more other quick one. Same thing, close your eyes. Raise your hands if you have the same administrator password on every workstation. Okay, good. We're making some progress there. Go ahead. Oh, yep.
It's not. Am I pushing the wrong button? Oh, I'm pushing the right one. It's just not close enough. So at the center of our security is our Active Directory and our identity. I've said a number of times, identity is the core unit of security. It's, in the mathematic world, there's 0 and 1. 1 is your unit. Well, in security, the unit is the user. User accounts specifically is the unit. Computers are actually glorified users when it comes to Active Directory. And that's where everything starts. And that's where the attacks also start.
Yeah, you cannot make a statement, an aspiration, a claim. You cannot do anything in security without using an identity as a subject or object in that sentence. Identity is core to security. It is simply just a part of it.
So if Active Directory is compromised, there's just a wealth of things that can happen. And this is just a short list. You've got malware implants that can be distributed. You've got all kinds of account abuse, password guessing. You start to guess passwords. There are a lot of people that use similar or the same passwords on their bank accounts as they do on their Active Directory accounts. It's just the way that it is. There's a bunch of different things that you can do to systems with a DC. You can push down group policy. You can push down scripts. You can modify ACLs on the directory and just kind of hide. There's just a ton of stuff that you can do because of the distributed nature of the DC. If you go through and you don't protect your DCs, you're going to get messed up. So that's where that's at. You see the guy with the unicycle. He's kind of going around the rules that are set for him. The more that we try to harden, the more that we try to fix things, the more the bad guy's going to try to find a way around it.
Which is one of the reasons that we like whitelisting so much better than we like blacklisting. So when we look at all of those kind of things that we've talked about, we need to have a language, we need to have a framework for understanding how people can get this control of our network or our environment so that we can address that. And we break it down into 3 different types of control. First is functional. Easy. There's a patch. There was something in either the design or the implementation of a product outside of your control prior to you buying it that creates a vulnerability that can be exploited. Or it's something that you simply absolutely have to do. Like, hey, I need an agent that runs code as system to install software, so it's simply a means of control that can be exploited for unauthorized reasons. So functional vulnerabilities, you patch it or you architect around it, and you essentially accept it and deal with them. Configuration vulnerabilities. I got a product or a capability that somebody else made for me, and then I make a configuration choice. Do I use older, weaker authentication protocols, older, weaker cryptographic algorithms, or do I use the stronger ones and go through the process of doing that? And you can create a vulnerability by making the wrong configuration choice. Third piece is what's really net new, and this is where credential theft falls into it. Operations. The decisions that are made, not at the factory, not when I first installed it, but every day. The hygiene that I use when I'm using my administrator credentials, all the things that I do on a day-to-day basis can create risk. And that's where operational security comes in to address operational vulnerabilities. Make sense? Cool. So with that, Sean is going to be trying to do a live demo of what is a very interesting means of control that even took us a little bit by surprise. We suspect this was not created by accident by an admin, but this was actually created by an adversary as a backdoor to access their environment. Never did confirm either way.
So, I have a little bit of restricted parameters on my demo. I wanted to keep it down to one machine. And, naturally it's a domain controller. And typically we wouldn't have a normal end user log on to a domain controller. But for the purposes of the demo, we're going to do that. So I wanted to make sure that we had that disclaimer out there. So if you go and see this user account, you can see that this user is just a regular generic user, is part of domain users, and that's it. There's nothing special about that user. Of course, I'm running an administrator command prompt asking about the user. So instead of doing that, I'm going to run as that user. Type in the right password, too. Of course, it's a 15-character plus password. Now, this user, we have a command window open now as this user. It's effectively like a user logging on to their regular workstation. And, on a DC, this user shouldn't be able to do much of anything, other than log on to it. So we go and we get our prompt, and since it's not an administrative user, come on, catch up. There it goes. We coming up? There we go. We have the services console. We shouldn't be able to do much of anything in here, right? You look at, just random service. Let's look at like DNS client. Right, this user gets a bunch of gray. It's a generic user. However, as part of the thing that we saw, you go into the services console, you go and you interrogate a service. Let's go back to a service. We'll just pick one at random. Come on. You see general, you see log on, you see recovery, you see dependencies. You don't see permissions. How many of you guys know how to set permissions on a service? Registry. What else? What are some of the ways you can do it? Group policy. You use SC tool. You can use, there's a number of ways to do it. When you look at the wealth of services that you have, this is an Azure IaaS DC, so it's got some Hyper-V stuff on it. But this is a pretty good amount of services, and a lot of them are running, and a lot of them are just kind of, there. That's a lot of stuff there. It's kind of hard to go through and enumerate what all of them are doing. So we'll pick another one. Let's look at SNMP Trap. And, I don't even know what SNMP Trap does, right? But what I do know is that this user now can edit it. A generic user. And this user also can go and change the startup type, who it logs on as. This user also can go and change the executable path eventually, right? So you go through and you think about, okay, well, what can you do when you can start a service, or you can change a service, right? You can change a service to log on as local system. Well, you could change the executable path to be a command. You could change it to be an elevation path, add net local group, add this person to domain admins, right? So if you look at the service itself, using, we like to use the access check sysinternals tool, you'll notice that everyone has read-write. It's just a small ace hidden in the middle of a whole bunch of services. And, the interesting thing that I noticed about this was when I was doing the testing, I actually set this ace when it was a member server. And then it persisted through promotion. So think about think about where that poisoning could have occurred, right? So there's a lot of different ways to kind of hide, and it's kind of a place that you could sit there, have that thing ready to go for years, and then time comes around, you get past the hash attack on an average regular user, get them to phish, get them to click on a bad website. If you know that's there, you can exploit it. And all these commands that, all these things that I'm doing in the UI, these commands can be issued remotely. So, you can do the elevation, you don't even have to be on the DC. This is where having a product like Advanced Threat Analytics would be really nice.
Yep. Cool. So, as Sean showed, there's a lot of things when you think about the complexity of an operating system. There's a lot of things that if an adversary has control of it, they have the ability to manipulate, change, and hide things. Everybody, anyone? How many people here have used the sysinternals tool that shows you all the things that start up automatically? Got it. There's a lot. That's another example of all the different things where an adversary could hide stuff. We see them. We see interesting trends around. We used to see them only change a few things on a few machines. That's kind of the mainstream of what we're seeing in the attacks today. That, hey, a couple of machines, because they don't want to maintain presence on hundreds or thousands of machines if they don't have to. But they were starting to get caught that way. And when some of the investigators noticed a pattern of, hey, there's only 5 of these in the entire enterprise, and every other DLL, for example, is a different file hash in the enterprise, then those stuck out like a sore thumb. So we're actually starting to see adversaries start to distribute their DLLs and their techniques across a bunch of machines so that they don't show up to the advanced investigators. So we are seeing extremely interesting evolutions as these guys are working, and it's very much point, counterpoint, spy versus spy kind of movement. So we have a couple things that we've published in terms of public guidance that we wanted to absolutely make sure you guys were aware of. Determined Adversaries and Targeted Attacks, a little bit older paper, but absolutely great because it talks about the mindset of the attackers and how they're technique agnostic and the approach that they take. Security Intelligence Report. We put this out about every 6 months, and this talks about what we see in the environment, and that what we see includes 2 main components. One is the for most of you are probably aware that Microsoft is an anti-malware provider. We're a search engine. We provide corporate email. We do a lot of things for a lot of customers, which gives us a lot of information on what's going on in the world in terms of what kind of compromised websites are out there, what kind of things are showing up through phishing email, what kind of malware is happening as far as reverse engineering them and the like. And so we end up with this very interesting perspective on things that we share about every 6 months in the Security Intelligence Report. And we also, in some of the recent editions, have talked about on our corporate network that our IT runs, what are we seeing? What are we seeing as trends as far as what kind of things are showing up, what the adversaries are doing, and that gives you a benchmark effectively that you can look at and say, well, what we're seeing on our network is this, and we can compare it to another corporation that's being attacked on a fairly regular basis. So the last piece I wanted to highlight, for those of you that haven't been there, is the credential theft portal. documents, videos, a number of other resources to help with the credential theft pieces. It's very easy URL, microsoft.com/pth. So very, very good resource for you. We really consider the 2 white papers required reading in today's world.
I'm controlling you now. So,
thanks, Vanna. So one of the things that we published in the version 2 of the white paper was something that we had been using in our cybersecurity practice as we were working with customers. That's a core piece of our reference architectures. And this is what we base our credential theft mitigations off of, is this tier model, and we also base our hardening prioritization off of this same model. And what we do is we divide up how important are these IT admins to your organization. And I want to make a very quick point. This is a technical lens. This is looking at your environment and the assets in it through a technical lens. We have to do that for the first pass of what's important, because everything right now in most businesses is under the control of one set of Active Directories and one set of management tools, one set of personnel. And so we have to look at it at a technical lens. Once we pass through and get the due diligence done, which is a work in progress, to get your administrative rights under control, the next step, when you start looking at how do I harden all of my servers and workstations and all of these various different things that are all over the place, we switch to a business lens. What are the most important assets I need to protect? What's the life cycle of them? And where are the things that are in, and what are the things that are in control of it to protect? So we start with this technical lens because we have to, but we're really doing this in alignment with the business to protect the business's most important assets. The reason why we care about Tier 0 controls everything. If I own your DCs, I control everything. If I own your CAs, I control everything. If I own your management tools that have agents on the DCs or the CAs, I own everything. That's why we care about it, because it controls every business asset. So that's where Tier 0 comes from, control of everything. Tier 1 is control of one or more enterprise resources. So something like a cloud service, an Exchange server, SQL servers, or more commonly, server admins. So the guys that have admin on every server because they're doing the patch and reboot cycle every month nowadays. That's Tier 1. Tier 2 is the admins in control of individual user devices. So printers, workstations, desktops, laptops, iPads, Windows phones. Anyone have a Windows phone? All of those different devices. Individual one-person at a time devices. They are valuable. Collectively, having control of all of them is from a business standpoint equivalent to Tier 1 or Tier 2. From a technical standpoint, it's not, because the adversary has to chase down each piece as opposed to finding it in one nice, neat package. So although all of these are very powerful and very important, we had to prioritize it. So we prioritized by domain admins and equivalents, server admins and equivalents, and then help desk and workstation and device admins and equivalents. Make sense? So how do we use this tier model? Oops. Let's go forward.
Put a tape line right there, because that's when you walk to there, you can do it. You walk about a foot back, you can't.
All right, let's go to the next one. There we go. So I'll start talking from this side of the stage. So what is important about this tier model? Control. You want to make sure that a lower tier admin does not have control or privileges at a higher tier. That is the main purpose of this. You want to prevent escalation of privilege, that if someone knocks over a workstation and can get those help desk admin or workstation admin credentials, that they can't get to domain admin quickly. So either through credential theft or through application and service abuse and manipulation. So you can never control up. You may have a need to control down. The domain admin may be used to provision server admin accounts. Server admins may provision help desk admin accounts. Depends. There's no really hard rules against it. It could happen. It's okay. But control up, workstation admin should never control server admin or enterprise resources, and server admins should never automatically have domain admin access, either legitimately and authorized or through abuse of a server system. So when we put together a strategy on this, we do two things. The first and most important is that escalation of privilege. We want to make sure that that does not happen. We would look at credential theft We also look at application agents and service accounts, which we're going to focus on in this particular session, credential theft in the later session. Lateral traversal, same thing, credential theft, app agent, service accounts. We want to make sure that knocking over one workstation or one server does not get you the rest of the workstations or the rest of the servers.
One question that usually comes up is, how do we define these boundaries? What are the technical controls? What are the process controls? Well, yes, there are. I mean, and it's, you're accomplishing it through firewalls. You're accomplishing it through, IPsec Ninja stuff. You're accomplishing it through access controls. You're accomplishing it through process. Written logs. Using safes and security bags and stuff like that. It's a mix of quantitative and qualitative controls and rules of engagement. You have to have a good standard. You have to have good process to have these boundaries and these rules.
Yeah, you have to think through this through that lens of people, process, and technology. Not just the technical controls, but also these are the practices that we expect you as an admin to follow, and then the people piece. Let's enable them, educate them, and train them so that the admins know the right thing to do, they have the tools, and they're enabled to be successful. Because, let me ask you this. How many people think if we put a technical control in place and it makes an admin's job harder, how many of you think they will work around it? That's what I thought. So we have to bring them into the loop. We have to make sure that they understand the importance of this. They have this education, this understanding, and that they also have the tools to enable them to be successful in this world. This is you?
So means of control. So there's a lot of different things that can get you in trouble with your Active Directory. Unpatched software, weak OS. You go and you don't apply the SCM baselines, at least to start, you can be in trouble. Management agents on servers, so your management tools, typically those agent accounts run elevated, and that's a risk. That becomes a low denominator. The built-in administrators group, if you have a situation where the build process adds users to the administrative group, and you are promoting into a new domain, those accounts go and they move with, or at least the first one does. And when you go and add more stuff to that built-in administrators group as part of whatever service needs to run, or agent needs to run, or whatever, it becomes a liability. Backup. Oh, go ahead.
I got a quick question. How many people here think there's a difference between an enterprise admin and a domain admin and a built-in administrator in the domain, in the built-in container, the user's container? You're wrong. There is zero difference from an attacker's point of view. There's a little bit of permissioning in AD. Enterprise admins can do some things to the configuration container from an explicit ACL perspective, what they're authorized to do. From an attacker's perspective, they are identical. They are all powerful, and an adversary can take any one of those and go between any of them as required. Additionally, the forest is a security boundary, not a domain. If I'm a domain admin, I can get control of every other domain in the forest, including the forest root. Not going to tell you how. It's not a good idea for us to do that. But you have to treat them all as tier 0 and all as equivalent from a security perspective. Now, you may give different people different roles because those people are going to follow the rules. But the protections you have to provide for them absolutely have to be all at that high standard.
You have your backup and storage administrators. So if you get somebody that can get a backup of your DC, then they can also get a backup of the ntds.dit file, right? And that's a liability. Baseboard controllers. Now, I've seen vulnerabilities in those where you can actually take control of a system as if it's, as if you're in front of the keyboard. Physical control is, you have physical, you bypass physical security, it's over. It's over. And then, as segue greatly into physical access, right? Virtual machine hosts, virtual machine administrators. If you can administer the host, you can administer the VM to a certain degree.
That's starting to change.
Yep. ACLs on computer, the OU, GPOs, the content within the GPOs. The media, host installation media in the process. If you poison the build process, you poison the end result, in which case these are DCs. And then you look at the lower level admin roles, and you have the domain and enterprise, but you also have schema admins, account operators, server operators, backup operators, group policy creator owners, and so on.
Let's try the once bitten, twice shy thing. How many people here think that a server operator or an account operator is not a domain admin? Oh, you guys learned.
They're learning.
So when you install, such as in a lab, a absolutely default, plain Jane, plain vanilla domain, they are very different. However, once you start putting tier 0 services, all those things that you see on the left, once you start putting other things that are in control of the domain, the account operators have control of those accounts, and the server operators have control of the servers where those things are installed. So they're tier 0 by virtue of that. So we treat all of those as if they are tier 0 because in a real environment, they are. You're not going to have DCs that are completely unmanaged and unmonitored.
So shielded VMs. So we had said that there was, if you controlled the VM host, you controlled the VMs. A new concept has been introduced that they're working on and is in.
It's a new version of Hyper-V and I believe System Center that's slated for 2016, if I recall. There's a session on this, so before you count on us for facts on it, check out that session with a lot of the details.
Right. I personally have not seen it yet, but I know that it's there and I'm excited.
And the key piece of this, if I can back up for just 1 second.
I will back you up, or no, you can back me up.
Okay, I'll back it up. So the thing that we really like about this is right now when we have to do one of these and we have to work with a very large enterprise customer, we have to tell them, you have to trust your virtualization admins and your storage admins and everything else as much as you do your domain admins if you virtualize your DCs. That means that physical hardware or a separate instance completely to protect that, to protect those. And that's not something that a lot of organizations want to do. The great thing about the shielded VMs that makes this a lot easier is it separates that I can manage the VM from I can control the VM. So that you have a trust plane that's separate from the management plane. And what it does is it sets you up so that you can cut out a lot of those problems that we showed on the left, and you have to secure a lot less things at tier 0 because your virtualization admins are really resource admins that are doing their job, and they're not able to extract the hashes with hacker tools from the DIP file that they get from the backups, from the virtualization, from all those pieces. So it really makes a very big break from the pain of today in the next version. It's and like I said, they announced it for Hyper-V in the next release.
So key guidance on hardening. Hardening is mitigating unauthorized control. You have to document what's authorized. This is a process. You can't really have the technical controls determine that. You have to determine that.
Yeah, I mean, when you say you're getting rid of unauthorized control, there's a little requirement in there that you have to know what's actually authorized. And it has to be written down in a way that your entire team can interpret it. You can't say, oh, these people can't do that and just let it float in the air and be forgotten or misinterpreted or misremembered. You have to know it's actually documented.
Well, and to the next point, you have to prioritize the actual control over the risk. So you have, an installed agent that is authorized to do a bunch of things. You need to make sure that you're hardening that agent before you're, putting firewall rules in or port blocking or whatever you're going to do.
I got a question actually, if you don't mind. How many people here, when they talk about hardening with their security team or our security team talks hardening about them, they're talking about open ports and IP addresses first, foremost, and always? Pretty common. And this is something that there are useful things to network security. There are very good things that network security does, but it is not the end-all, be-all of security containment or segmentation. You cannot do that purely at a network level. You have to do it at an identity level. You have to be at the application, the data, and the operations level as well. And you have to make sure that there's a big difference between potential, an attack surface that I can throw something at. It's kind of like, hey, there's a badge reader on the wall. I don't really care. There's a badge reader, and then there's a badge hanging there that you can swipe on it and get yourself in at any time you want. That's a very different story. So potential control versus actual is something that we're not very disciplined in the security world, to be quite honest, and we need to get much, much better at that.
So you got to finish the basics first, and this is going to be a common theme for the tail end of this presentation. You have to do the core basic stuff first. If you don't start with strengthening settings, going through and reducing the amount of potential risk, you're done. You can't. There's not a magic bullet for this. And then there's the advanced stuff.
Sorry.
Where everything else comes later. And that's the stuff that's higher effort. That's the stuff that's going to take cultural change in a lot of environments. There's a lot of people who have been victimized where they started out just operating the way that they operated. They operated their business. They didn't realize that they were in their IT staff didn't realize that they were in a world. They might have thought about it, might have kind of haphazardly went about their ways, thinking, oh, we're gonna have security be important. It wasn't until things started happening. Lots of things started happening. People started showing up on the news that it became now instead of you being a Active Directory administrator, you're actually in charge of the security of your environment. So some of the lessons that we've learned. Whitelisting is always more effective, but it's also the most expensive. So you have to find a balance between how much you're spending, how much you're securing. However, it gets to a point, it does get to a certain point where it's actually cheaper to throw everything away and start over and whitelist and do everything. Culture, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you don't have your admins used to not using their everyday accounts, they're going to use their everyday accounts for administrative purposes. They're going to use the workstation that they use to check their fantasy football scores to administer the domain. And at that point, they're potentially one click away from the enterprise being over. And then also, don't be afraid to start changes, especially if you're in an environment that that's been breached. All right, we assume breach. We kind of assume it. We don't. In some circumstances, we don't know it. If you're in a situation where you know it, and there's a lot of people that they know it because they see it on the news, you have to not be afraid to use that as a vehicle for change. You get to an environment that they just showed up on CNN. Tom Brokaw is saying this person got breached. Well, your leeway for making changes goes up there because end users might push back. Well, I want my application to work. Well, yeah, you want your application to work, but I want to show up not on CNN again. So you are able to kind of use that as a vehicle to make the changes. It's kind of akin to fire and brimstone to a certain degree. But if it's already happened, if it's something that's already there, you're not really spreading FUD at that point. If you've already been compromised, then we need to change. We need to fix this.
There's that old political saying, don't let a crisis go to waste. And in some ways, it's also true in this industry, because you guys ever play Monopoly and you get the little card that says bank error in your favor, you get like $150 or whatever? It's kind of like that, because you have this credibility from the security side where you're able to make a certain amount of changes with the users on a given point in time. And so the context and the environment that we're in right now gives us an opportunity to make some changes. We have to make the right ones, because if we simply abuse our users and make them do a bunch of things that don't make us more secure, we're essentially wasting that money instead of actually getting value for it. So definitely don't be afraid to spend it, but again, spend it carefully and correctly.
And then finally, beware of the unseen. And it goes back to the small demo. There's a lot of stuff. You get into an Active Directory, you get into some of the bigger Active Directories. Corp has, 500,000 endpoints?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. So, 500,000 objects. You look at the ACEs on the objects, and there's a bunch of different ACEs. And then you look at all the computers, you do all the users, all the stuff, and then just so much data that you have to go through that you end up seeing only a small amount of the potential problems. So, we talk about what are the built-in tier 0 groups, right? Everybody wants to focus on the big three, right? Administrators, domain admins, enterprise admins, right? But really, this is the list of built-in groups that we've identified as tier 0 so far, right? And when I say we have identified them as tier 0, that there is less than 10 clicks away, you're less than 10 clicks away from elevating, right? And when I say clicks, I mean a command, typing in a command and hitting enter is a click, right? So, I mean, that's a lot of vectors for elevation. Identity system components. My passion and the reason why I've been at this company for as long as I have, other than not saying things that are really, really dumb, are certificate authorities. I helped to write the Securing PKI white paper last year, and I built a lot of CAs, and that's how I started, and it's something I'm passionate about. It's also something that flies under the radar in most environments. When you have a certificate authority, especially in enterprise CA and Active Directory, it is delegated rights from the enterprise administrator, so it effectively acts on behalf of that enterprise administrator. The enterprise administrator is granting the trust to the CA. Well, I'm going to think about the things that you can do with a CA. You can mint smart cards. So if you misconfigure the CA administrators, the local administrators on the CA itself, enroll on behalf of is a very trivial thing to do. You can sign code. You can sign malware. You can bypass malware controls or whitelisting with signed malware.
I'd like to highlight something Sean just said. Mint smart cards. That means a lot to us, but I want to make sure you guys really grasp the concept of that. If an adversary gets a hold of your CA, they can issue a cert, smart card cert, to themselves, erase it from the database, and then have a smart card that logs in as one of your enterprise admins that no matter how many times you change the password on that guy, they still have access to it at any point that they conveniently want to, silently, and it shows up just like a normal log. So CAs are super critically important.
Well, and then finally you can set up SSL man-in-the-middle attacks with CAs as well. So you could set up a server to listen for certain requests and just harvest credentials. Federation providers, your ADFS and other flavors of Federation, your STS servers are effectively delegated the same type of service processing that domain controllers are. So if you are able to exploit that, it's effectively the same thing as a DC. Identity management suites, if you can change passwords, if you can write to users, if you can write to groups, then you can add users to groups, and the accounts that run those become a low denominator. Migration utilities. Anything that writes to SID history is a tier 0 account. And then your privileged identity management solutions. I love PIM software when it comes to threat modeling, because typically they have accounts that run the service, and those accounts are the least common denominator in the system. So why go after domain admin accounts when I can go after the account that controls the domain admin accounts? And then finally, my two favorite things in terms of things that get hidden are delegated permissions. So anytime that somebody in good faith is trying to give out, rights to somebody to do something, to operate a function, do some sort of a task, we don't want to give them domain admins. Let's give them delegated permissions. Well, what happens is you end up having that in nesting accumulation. And nesting accumulation is when you add people to groups to give them functionality, give them access to certain resources. You combine these things, and the next thing you know, they have tier 0 equivalent, and they don't even have to be a member of any of these groups. So that's something you got to watch out for. You almost have to reevaluate the membership of your users, especially your everyday users. When I use the term everyday users, I mean the account that you use to read your email and go to the internet. Right? If you're administering, ideally, you're using an account that has no right to do that, does not have an email box, cannot get on the internet, is marked as sensitive and not delegated, is got deny aces everywhere, and is locked down.
So this leads to the question of, how do I deal with this? Because we've talked a lot about the problem. We're going to get into the solution side and kind of dive into the key things to get you started first. But before we dive into that, we want to really give you an honest view into what is good, better, best. And the reality is, good is applying a lot of these hardening techniques, credential theft, and remediating all of these kinds of issues in your existing environment. Good from a security perspective. Better is, you know what? I don't want to sit there and analyze all my DC operating systems, this, that, and the other. I'm just going to roll new ones. I'm going to set up a hardened image. I'm going to get it right. I'm going to get on the latest OS, and I'm just going to roll over all of my existing operating systems. And the same thing with my GPOs. Anything that applies to a tier 0 asset, a DC, a CA, any of those management servers with an agent on the DCs, I'm just going to roll the known good baselines from SEM over my existing stuff. I don't want to have to analyze the heck out of it. I'm just going to whitelist that. But I'm not yet ready to take my AD and throw it out the window and start fresh and do a migration, because that's expensive. So that's kind of the middle ground. That's the better. The best is to start from scratch, where we have so much legacy, or we actually have funding because we had an incident, or lots of different reasons why you would get to this conclusion. But the ideal case is start fresh.
Well, and in some circumstances, some attacks that we've seen, the victim was so far gone that the level of effort to remediate in the good and better categories, the amount of actual work for that was less than starting over.
Yep. And of course, there is also the worst case scenario that, hey, I had wiper malware and it wiped my entire environment. You're kind of forced into that environment. You don't ever want to be there on purpose from a wiper standpoint, but that is another scenario that drives you there. But the key is, that is a very valid option, and from a security perspective is the best option. From a business perspective, and you look at the cost versus reward, how much does the migration cost, how much does the hardening cost, what assurances do I get, you may land on the better for now and be planning a best in the future.
When you think about the application creep that you end up getting, people have been running Active Directory for 16 years now, and the amount of applications that accumulate over that time, going greenfield is not necessarily a sustainable thing for all those applications. You have to test them. You have to make sure you run, usability tests, things like that. You can't disrupt the business.
Yep. So you may end up with a coexistence phase. You do end up with a coexistence phase whenever you do a greenfield, typically. So we decided to break it down a little bit further for you guys, put together this chart. And we really have 4 different categories of kind of the means of control for a tier 0 asset, mostly really the domain itself. Operating system itself, if I own the OS, I own it. Group policy objects, if I own the GPOs, I can run an arbitrary startup script, I own you. AD content, so something hidden in the AD content, permissions, ACLs, you name it, I can own you. And then, of course, operational practices. So operational practices is primarily what we recommend the credential theft space. The Active Directory content is where the real greenfield challenge and the gut-wrenching decisions come into play. Operating systems are pretty simple from that perspective because you usually have an operating system deployment capability already. And so putting out a new known good hardened one means you have to come up with a hardened image. And we're not talking about, oh my God, we have to push the adversaries out type of urgency. We're talking about it's easier to harden my operating system than it is, it's easier to rebuild a new operating system than it is to harden the old one, and just simply rolling those as you have maintenance windows and availability. And so that one, getting to best is not that hard, which is why getting to the best piece, so that's why it fits into that better strategy. Group policy objects also fairly straightforward. There's usually only a couple of GPOs that apply to the DCs and to the management servers and the like. And so getting those things harmonized and aligned with known good baselines is fairly straightforward. AD content is ugly. When you think about the amount of objects, as Sean mentioned, and ACLs, and is this object supposed to be here or not? Are the ACLs on it right? Are the attributes on it abused? That is a very difficult proposition. This is an area where our team is working very actively right now to define what is the best way of addressing this, because telling a customer that you have to build everything fresh is not a good thing that we want to be telling our customers, and we're working through how do we solve that better. And then operations, pretty much follow the credential theft pieces, and there's a lot more details in today's 5 o'clock session. I love how I point at the screen instead of at the receiver. It's just a human thing. So, getting Tier 0 under control. These are the really quick, okay, how do I turn this into practice items? So you gotta, so when we walk into an environment, this is essentially our default advice. And so this is our advice to you today. Reduce and protect those human accounts. So take care of your credential theft piece, separate admin accounts, separate admin workstations, at least 2 personnel. You need at least 2 people. People get hit by buses. It actually happens. Things happen, people get fired, people quit.
People go on vacation.
They go on vacation.
They come, their entire team comes to Ignite.
So always at least 2, but you really want to justify every single person above that. We don't have a high limit. We don't say it's 5. We don't say it's 10. But you want to specifically look very carefully at why you would ever add more than 2. Because there's not a lot you have to actually do as a domain admin with that level of privileges.
And this is what I like to call a religious discussion. Right? There are a lot of philosophies as to how you would, say for instance, how you would populate the domain admins group. Right? Should there be 1 account in there? And we call it break class. Should there be 2? Should there be a group? Should there be 1,000 accounts in there? Should be. This is a religious discussion, and you have to find a process and a process that works for you. We have the ones that we recommend. We have the ones that we recommend in certain services that we deliver. But I think the main recommendation is just get it under control. Right? If you don't need to have 1,000 people in domain admins. I guarantee you don't need to have it.
Yep.
But get that number down. Ideally, you would have 0 accounts that are being used to read email and surf the internet.
The other 2 pieces to address the low-hanging fruit, the most important parts of the app and service hardening, because we've described a very large problem space to you guys. You want to make sure that you are delegating those service accounts out of Tier 0. There should be no reason why you have a service account that has full Tier 0 privileges. None. Maybe you install agents on DCs. That should be done through imaging or manually by a person. You should not have a service account in a Tier 0 group actively all the time. You may have to make exceptions until you get to a point where you can mitigate those and you have a transition period, but that should be a never have it, and you have to justify the exception regularly type of thing. You do not want those accounts sitting around with that level of privilege that do not have the person's accountability on it.
Well, and if you get to a situation where you have an account that is in those, and it happens, I mean, it happens. We want there to be none, but it happens. You need to make sure you are controlling it. You are actively monitoring that account. You have the SOC lit up if that account is doing anything that it's not supposed to be doing.
If it shows up out of pattern, you want that to be an alert that is responded to within minutes. The good news is it's actually not that hard. Most of the time, people put them in tier 0 because of laziness. They either need to manage all workstations and servers and distribute agents, and there is ways to delegate that, and we've got some information in the coming slides on how to do that, or they're an identity management provider that really only needs to manage user accounts, not admin accounts. So for the most part, accomplishing that is actually pretty easy. Now, there will be sticky exceptions, your PIM service accounts and some others like that you'll have to work through. But for the most part, getting them out of there, getting it down to 2 to 3, and aiming for that 0 is not that challenging when you start focusing on that problem. Last piece, management tools. This is another area where we see way too many tier 0 equivalents. We see half a dozen or a dozen agents installed on a DC very frequently. When you guys get and most, if not all of them, actually are in full control of that DC and can run arbitrary code and scripts and do whatever they want on it. How many of you guys, when you bought an antivirus product, the Microsoft one is actually one of the few we actually found that only does anti-malware. It's kind of nice. Windows Update is the only one that only does patching in its class. Every other one is extensible. You guys know what extensible means? I can run any random crap, scripts, code, plugins, modules, etc. That means if I own your management tool, be it your update and patch management solution or your anti-malware solution, I can install and load a custom module which can be malicious and run arbitrary code on that system as an attacker. Because those agents trust that server and will do whatever it tells them to do.
And you bring up a good thought on my part, which is, you don't have to have admin to run most services. You can use an accumulation of user rights, and you can find the lowest. There are ways to find the lowest set of user rights without having full administrative rights. Backup software doesn't need to have admin. It needs to have backup, and it needs to have restore. And arguably, it doesn't need to have restore yet. You could wait to grant it restore, but it needs backup. So you can reduce the amount of things that you need, and really it's up to, in a lot of circumstances, up to working with the vendor, even if it's us, in trying to get the lower set of privileges.
And for the most part, the amount of management tools you actually need on a DC are very low. So if you have 10, 12, 20, 50, or 100 DCs, that's a very small amount of servers that doesn't really get into your hardware asset catalog that heavily. It tends to be a very powerful and very important, but a very small set of your environment. And you need to start making hard decisions of, do I really, really, really need to manage it that way? Or can I find an alternate way of doing it to keep yourself out of expanding your corporate risk that significantly? Vanna, if you don't mind. So when you're delegating out of tier 0, there's really two different things. Managing an operating system, your workstations and your servers, or you're managing AD objects. That is why most of these service accounts and tools get tier 0 access. So when you're managing workstations and servers, there's a plethora of features that have been there since Windows 2000 in some cases, and when we added group policy preferences in 2008 or so, that allow you to make an account, or much better a group, because it's easier to manage a group and the members of it, a local admin on all workstations or all servers. You can either with restricted groups say this is the set of members that will be in the local administrators on these machines, set it in GPO, everything else gets wiped, that is the answer. Or with the group policy preferences, you can do the same thing, or you can add and say, well, whatever's there, which is a mess, we're just going to add one more group to it. And then you can take them out of domain admins. You can take them out of enterprise admins. You can take them out of built-in administrators. And that allows you to lower your risk significantly, because when you're admin on one of those local machines, you have much less privilege, and you cannot dump the DIT file and extract the hash of every single user, which no tool needs and no service account needs. Second piece, very common scenario, managing AD accounts and objects. Just delegate permission to the OU. This is a place where delegation is a good thing. You want a group that has those permissions to be able to do that management, and you only want them to manage users 99% of the time. PIM solutions want to manage admin accounts. But most of them only need to manage users and sync users and update attributes of users. So just give them those permissions. Take them out of account operators. Take them out of domain admins. Take them out of enterprise admins, built-in administrators. They do not need to be there.
Well, and one thing that we're starting to clean up is, you see guidance on how to set up XYZ product in a lab. And you'll see shortcuts. You'll see what happens. You'll see shortcuts where the guidance says, okay, we'll add this account to the administrative group. Well, the reason why the guidance for the lab says that, because in theory you should be running that in the lab. That shouldn't be production guidance. However, if it's the only guidance out there, then it kind of by default becomes production guidance. And there's been a very large effort to clean those things up. And we've seen that a lot. We've seen where it was part of how we did it in the lab. That's how we got it working. So we did it that way in production. Well, that's good for functionality, not good for security. It's a real easy way to mess your stuff up.
So we've got a few minutes left, and we're going to go through these a little bit on the quicker side. When you have a management tool in Tier 0, you actually have a couple different choices. The first and best is you simply drop it from Tier 0. Hey, we're going to take the agent off. We don't need XYZ management of the DCs. We just load it on every server, and it happened to include the DCs, and we realize it's a bad idea. That's the first, best, easiest choice. Second is, hey, we need this capability. And we see this a lot in the management space. Hey, we don't need SCCM, but we do need to patch the DCs. So we're going to go ahead and put up a dedicated WSUS instance. So that's another way to do it, to keep it from spanning those tiers and creating that violation. And there's two that are a little bit more involved. So, hey, we need this capability, and we have so many DCs that it is worth us setting up a separate instance. A separate instance in this case means the management itself, the tool, any databases or dependencies of it, and then the admin workstations and admin users, which of course can be used for other Tier 0 functions or other Tier 1 functions. But you can set up a dedicated instance as well. It tends to be the most expensive, but it is perfectly safe and effective. And then the last one, a little higher bar. You can, because what we talked about with the tier model is we're enforcing that tier model through Active Directory. We're trusting Active Directory as an application to enforce those tier boundaries, because we know the RBAC model of AD and we know how all those systems work. You can also trust a single instance of an application to enforce the tier model and the tier model boundaries. You have to know the RBAC model of the application well. If you're doing it with System Center or a configuration manager, that you have to know it well. If you're doing it with Landesk, if you're doing it with Ops Manager, if you're doing it with any of those tools, you absolutely have to know that RBAC model well, so that by accident, you don't give these guys the ability to control something up there. So, can be done, but you really have to know that well, and you have to implement it very correctly. Last thing I wanted to cover very, very quickly, because we're running very short on time, is we do look at the cloud very heavily. We see the tier model applying very well to the cloud in terms of cloud services for the most part, mirroring the on-premise services in Tier 1 and the like. Cloud security is a partnership, and we are seeing a lot of these things increasing at all layers. The cloud actually helps us get out of some of this pain. When I say us as me helping you guys as customers, because it shifts a lot of this stuff to the cloud itself. And you don't have to worry about ILOs and DRACs on a workload that you've shifted to the cloud. O365, who here has patched O365? Nobody. You don't have to. It's all done for you. All of those application controls are helping you manage your endpoints, helping you manage your data, helping you manage your accounts. Those are value add, valuable to the business, individual to your IT department value propositions. SaaS is awesome. PaaS, well, there's nothing commodity out there. We have to write a little code. Well, secure that little bit of code you run, but do it on worker roles, do it on web roles. Do not do it on a full OS that you have to manage and patch.
And one thing I want to make sure to highlight, and this is one of my favorite slides, is you notice on the top 3 rows, they're all blue. All of that, so data governance, client endpoints, account and access management, that's all stuff that the cloud's not going to fix. That's all stuff. If you have a process that's janked, you're going to have a process in the cloud that's janked. If you have client endpoints that are poisoned, then you're going to have a cloud experience that's poisoned. And the main thing with going to the cloud is it's not the answer to all solutions per se, but it does fix a lot of things. It does relieve the responsibilities for a lot of things for your administrators.
And it lets you focus on what is most important to your business and takes the commodity stuff off your plate. Last thoughts, hardening always does start with credential theft, but continues on into service accounts, management tools, PKI. Definitely want to remove that unnecessary tier 0 controls. Simplify your hardening. You have less things to harden if you drop the priority. As soon as I pull an agent off, I don't have to worry about hardening that management tool at tier 0 like I have to harden the other ones. Move your workloads to SaaS and PaaS if it makes sense. Take advantage of that. Get some of this pain off your plate. Building new is a more sustainable security assurance, but it comes with that cost. It's harder to do. It's more expensive. And some resources can't be hardened. Some stuff, well, we're running this because it's a medical device and it keeps people alive, but the vendor is out of business or the vendor does not support anything beyond XP or whatever. Isolate those. Take those out of the mix. Do not put them in production where they can be exploited, where they're exposed to the internet. So the stuff that can't be hardened, definitely take those out of the mix if you can.
So we have, a couple minutes? So we could probably take 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, head up to the mics and yes.
Or get an early
Looks
start.
like everyone's heading for the doors, so we'll take questions afterwards. Thank you guys very much.